Hello, I am Evans, your electronic virtual onboard navigation system. How can I help you, Dr. Xander Beltran?
Hello, Evans. So I am Xander, then. Makes sense. I've been wearing his uniform since I woke up.
Invalid audio prompt, Dr. Xander Beltran. How can I help you?
I'm tired of having no one to talk to. I'm tired of being alone. So, without going completely crazy, I'd like to talk to you, Evans, if that's okay.
Invalid oral prompt, Dr. Xander Beltran. Would you like to enter an audio log? I will begin recording. Recording.
Yeah, I guess that could work. If I die, maybe a recording could help someone at some point. If I don't, well, it's going to be a very depressing reminder of what I'm guessing is the worst point in my life. So far. I suppose I should make this sound official. How do people normally start logs? The date. The day is... Well, I don't know. The time... Yes, I don't know that either. Come to think of it, I haven't seen any clocks yet. I guess people don't keep time in space. Time and space. I don't know what happened. I don't know who I am or how I got here. I know what I can see. I'm wearing a uniform embroidered with the name Xander. There are massive windows. I can peer outside and look at nothing. It took a few moments of wandering around to realize I was in a massive station, somewhere deep in outer space. No matter where I am in the station or what window I'm looking out of, there's nothing close by. No planets, no ships, nothing that looks human or remotely like Earth. And there's no one else. Just Evans. This was a stupid idea. How do I turn this off, Evans? Stop this.
Thank you for using the Evans interface. Your recording has ended. Goodbye.
Evans, it's Xander. I guess I'm going to give this another shot. It's probably been a day or two since we last talked. I'd like to make another recording, if I could.
Request entered. Hello, Dr. Xander Beltran. Your log will begin recording immediately. Recording.
Thank you, Evans. What am I saying? It's not a real person. You're alone, you idiot. It's just you up here. Now, I need to do this. I need to maintain sanity, or I am definitely going to lose it. I know there's no one here. I know it's just me. But things are moving around. Stuff gets left places I don't remember. One day I'll walk by the rec room. I go there sometimes to run on the treadmills and feel normal. And I'll blast whatever music they have so I can imagine a filled room, but I don't ever swim. I'm not sure if I know how. So it doesn't make sense that I keep finding discarded and wet towels hanging out to dry next to the pool. I swear they weren't there yesterday. And even if they were, how could they still be wet? How could I forget going swimming? Oh, okay, Evans. That's enough for today.
Thank you for using the Evans interface. Your recording has ended. Goodbye.
Evans, I want to record.
Request entered. Hello, Dr. Xander Beltran. Your log will begin recording immediately.
Recording. Yeah, Evans, I know the drill. Look, I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. There's no one here to argue with but myself and... I guess you. But I know it's true. I know I'm not alone here. A couple of days ago, I found a digital camera in one of the empty living quarters. I took pictures of every fucking inch of this station. When I went to sleep, I took a pint of salt with me. I made a thick circle around the bed, one that was impossible to jump across. I even took pictures of the circle just to prove to myself that I did it. I woke up today. The salt hadn't moved, which means I didn't move either. But something else did. I went through each room. I walked all over this goddamn station. I compared the pictures I took to everything I found. For a while, I couldn't spot any differences. But when I got to the cafeteria, I saw it. It was such a small change, but I caught it. The chairs. I never pushed them back in since I woke up. They'd all been moved. They were under the tables, perfectly in place, like someone was cleaning up around the station. I don't understand it. Why change that? Why alter something so small? Jesus Christ, what the hell is happening? Can a space station be haunted? Oh God, I'm going crazy. I'm going crazy. Shut it off, Evans. I have to stop. Just turn it off.
Thank you for using the Evans interface. Your recording has ended. Goodbye.
Evans, start recording. Please, Evans, please don't say anything. I'm not alone. I saw them. How stupid I was to think it was ghosts. They're here now. They're hunting me. They know that I know. I don't know how long I can hide. I took some shots of caffeine and pretended to fall asleep in the night. I thought I could sneak up on something, but it snuck up on me. It took everything I had not to scream. I think they've always been here. They've always been watching me. Maybe they're doctors like I was. Maybe this is all a fucked up experiment. Maybe Evans is one of them. I'm probably going to die. They know that I know, and I'm scared that I'll forget. I'm scared I won't remember. Oh God. Oh fuck! Please, no!
Messages deleted. Thank you for using the Evans interface. Goodbye. Hello, I am Evans, your electronic virtual onboard navigation system. How can I help you, Dr. Xander Beltran?
Hi, Evans. And Xander. That's who I am. That makes sense. I am wearing his clothes.
Our eyes were greeted by the cold and dusty surface of the moon, studded with craters and strewn with regolith rocks. The moon was much larger than I had envisioned. I was strapping on my spacesuit when a disturbing feeling hit me. I don't feel too well, Tom, I let out in confusion. Same here, Liam, Tom added. You feel the same way too? I asked curiously. Yeah, I have this pain in my head, Tom replied. It's probably nothing. I was ready to take my first step on the moon. We had practiced dozens of simulation missions on the moon for years, and we had dreamt of this moment ever since. Our mission was simple: explore the lunar surface for anything strange and collect data and soil samples in just 1 hour. But we had filled our tanks with enough oxygen to last us 30 more minutes. The surface of the moon was nothing like back on Earth. It was lacking any evidence of life, and it was void of oxygen and atmosphere. It had lots of fine, talcum powder-like dust mixed with a complete variety of pebbles, rocks, and boulders, but it was still a delightful sight. It smells like gunpowder, Tom chuckled. The awkward pain in my head grew every second, but I tried to convince myself that it was nothing to worry about. I was standing above the moon, and that seemed to be the most important thing at the moment. 90 minutes. Tom, you ready? I said with excitement, and Tom nodded in agreement. I knew I was born for this moment. I could hear the whispers of fulfillment in my head, and not even a headache would stop me. Is your timer ready? I'd asked one last time, and Tom nodded in confirmation. We jumped off the lunar module and turned on the timer. Our first steps on the moon were quite rocky as we fought to regain balance and get used to the moon's gravity. The pain in my head was slowly becoming unbearable, and I began to wonder what was causing it. I noticed that Tom was also uncomfortable. Have we done something wrong? I thought to myself, but no. We had heeded to all the necessary precautions. Are you alright, Tom? Not really, Tom replied. I feel like I hit my head on a rock. This was not the experience we had hoped for, but we had to brave through it. We strolled away from our lunar module Spacecraft. I was curious to explore everything I saw. We had to keep watch at our timers though, so that we would not get too far past our time. Moonwalking was the most intensive task, yet fun part of our short lunar adventure. We feel like an oxymoron of both light and heavy at the same time. Gravity is such a beautiful concept, I thought. Tom was holding up so far, which was a good sign, although he seemed to be feeling the brunt of the pain more than I was. We collected some samples and were already preparing to return to our lunar module. We were both exhausted, and the pain in my head had spread to other parts of my body. We knew we had to return immediately if we didn't want to pay a heavy price. My vision was slowly becoming blurred, been contaminated by a space virus, I thought. Several thoughts ran through my head as we made our way back towards our lunar module spacecraft. Where is the spaceship? I was certain that this was the spot. I stared at the gray lunar surface, and I could see where our footsteps had begun. My first step was on the lunar surface of the moon, but our spaceship was gone without a trace. Tom fell to the floor. Tom! What's wrong? He had been breathing heavily for a while, and I just wanted to get back into the space module, but now, the entire spacecraft was gone without a trace. I can't breathe, Tom whispered. I stared at my timer. But it's just been about 70 minutes. We still have almost 20 minutes left. My heart began to race, and I stared in confusion as Tom groaned under his spacesuit. My vision began to blur, and once again the pain in my head had doubled. What is going on? I mused. Everything didn't seem logical anymore. The painful headaches, the blurry vision, and now our missing transport. I dropped to the floor as I occasionally took glances at my timer. What was I going to do about Tom? I couldn't even take off his space helmet as I watched him struggle to stay alive. An explosion erupted behind me as my heart skipped a beat. I stood abruptly and shifted my gaze towards the direction of the sound. A thick mist had enveloped the site of the explosion. My sight was still blurry, but I could see something move in the distance. My deepest fears were finally becoming a reality. I'd always feared that something was going to happen during the trip. I dragged Tom to a spot behind a small moon rock as something approached from the distance. I took a closer look at the footsteps in front of me and realized that they weren't ours. What the? I exclaimed as my heart pounded loudly. Running was not a good idea, as gravity was against us and Tom had passed out. He was still breathing, and I hope he stayed that way. I took a glance at my timer once again. I had just 5 minutes to get back into the lunar module before I ran out of oxygen. What could have taken something as huge as our spacecraft without any noise or signs? I became so lost in thoughts that I forgot that I'd seen something move in the mist earlier. I heaved a heavy sigh and jerked my head up to see what had moved in the mist. Nothing. Everything had returned to exactly how it was earlier. No explosions, no mist, and no movements. Am I going crazy? I asked myself as I returned my gaze to the alien footprints. They still looked that way. I heard another bang at a distance and immediately shifted my gaze in that direction. I could spot what seemed like our spacecraft in the distance. Maybe I was wrong about where we'd stepped down anyway. A ray of hope burst through my entire being as I immediately grabbed Tom and hopped towards the direction of the spacecraft. I stared at my timer once again, and it read 3 minutes. I had been hopping into space over the moon for about a minute when I noticed that the spacecraft was not getting any closer. I set Tom down. Fear blanketed my face once again as I stood alone on the entire moon in confusion. What was meant to be an adventurous space trip to the moon suddenly took a sharp turn into a terrifying race for survival. The strange mist soon began to form again around me. I was almost convinced that I had lost my mind. I stared at Tom. Tom? Tom! Tom! I screamed in dread, but my voice was shielded by my spacesuit. Tom was gone without a trace. I stared at my timer. 1 minute. All of a sudden, a foul creature grabbed me from behind, tackling me towards the lunar surface and throwing several punches at my helmet. There was something familiar about the alien. I had surely seen it before, but I wondered how. One of its punches made a small crack on my helmet. I had to do something. I immediately buried my knee towards its groin region and propelled it into space with my feet. It seemed to float in space. Suddenly, I remembered where I'd seen the alien. It was a movie back on Earth. My scariest movie. I finally guessed what had been going on all night. "Tom, stop!" I screamed, but he was probably seeing me too as some sort of extraterrestrial life form, and it took a second before he came to a halt. The mist had settled and we both stood facing each other. He dashed towards me again, throwing his arms forward. I knew it was Tom, so I had to be cautious. I dodged his blow and grabbed him from his back, ripping out one of his oxygen pipes by mistake. As the gas sipped out, my fears were confirmed. We had not been breathing in oxygen since we stepped out of the ship. My timer began to beep. Tom was out of oxygen and fell to the ground unconscious. I shut my eyes and prayed underneath my breath. At least we were going to be recorded in history as the astronauts who never made it back. The 2 astronauts who died on the moon. I could already imagine the many captions on several magazines trying to describe how we died. I opened my eyes once more, and our lunar module stood right in front of me. I couldn't believe my eyes. What is going on? I thought. I shut my eyes and opened them again after a while. The module was gone. I repeated the process, and the lunar module had reappeared. I stared at my timer. It had run down to the very last second. I was out of oxygen too. I kept my eyes wide open, grabbed Tom and carried him towards the module. I had also run out of oxygen, but this was our last shot at survival. And if I missed it, then our stories would be told by someone else. I leaped towards the lunar space module as fast as I could. I didn't have any oxygen left and I couldn't even blink, but I kept my mind and my gaze fixed on the goal as I soared forward. I reached the spacecraft, rushed in, and shut the door behind me as we both fell to the ground. Oxygen had never felt so good. I proceeded to take off my spacesuit and toss it on the ground as I tried to wrap my head around what had just happened as the headache began to lift off. Everything still seemed to swirl around us in a distorted manner. I finally shut my eyes and reopened them again, but nothing seemed to disappear anymore. We had both been hallucinating all along. Just then, a thought crashed into my mind as I immediately sprung up and rushed for the oxygen tank. I read the label on the tank. It read, HLN oxygen. Caution. Causes intense hallucinations. The hallucinating gas we use back on Earth at the space hub for research purposes. But its cylinder looks so much like normal oxygen. Tom had asked me to separate it from the normal oxygen before our mission, but it somehow skipped my mind. We have been hallucinating ever since we put on our spacesuit. I shifted my gaze towards Tom and knelt beside him. He was still breathing. "You'll be fine, buddy," I mused, as I marched forward to prepare for liftoff.
I've just crossed into the hatch.
He called out into the static and silence, floating through into the minuscule metal cone, pulling himself in by handles to find bakelite buttons and sterile systems, clean and pristine as the day the module was launched. Pulling the door shut, he peered through the porthole above it to bear witness to the blue-green planet he called home so far below, only to be met with nothing. No stars, no sun, no light, nor discernible distance, as though the universe itself had vanished.
Yet again, there is nothing. I know this thing will run out of recording time soon, but I'm struggling here.
Silence. Painful silence.
I just want to hear a human voice again. Somebody. Anybody. I don't care if it's English or Russian or Zulu or whatever.
He trembled in lost desperation, still staring out the porthole, hoping something would change, wishing that something would be.
Even if it's my own voice, I know it's stupid. I'm losing my mind here. I just don't want to be alone anymore.
More silence followed. That's all that was left in the empty space outside of the capsule.
I don't think anybody will find this. Hell, I know nobody will find this. But, just in case.
recording captured the sounds of him shuffling into the seat at the control panel, followed by a long sigh.
It was in the early 21st century. Not that I have any idea what the year is now, but I don't suppose it matters. And something appeared in Earth's orbit. There were whack jobs who instantly thought aliens and took to their bunkers. People panicked, and governments tried to keep it hush-hush, as they always do. But everyone had phones, the internet. It was on the front page of every newspaper, from Washington to Wuhan.
He clicked a few buttons on the console to see if anything would change this time. Flicking switches and turning knobs didn't seem to do much of anything.
Well, it wasn't aliens. It was us. Apollo 1. There was never any fire. They lost the damn thing in space and tried to cover it up.
He gave an anxious chuckle.
After all that time, it came back. It found its way home. You'd think maybe it got more than extremely lucky and swung by a planet's orbit, or got pushed back by some magnetic force out there, or I don't know, something, but that's not it.
A deep breath, a staggered, hollow laugh.
No, I'm not going to say what brought it back, because I don't know. But there's something different about it. The powers that be, the powers that were, I should say, sent me and the crew up to investigate, check for damage, and find out why it was back here, hanging in a geostationary orbit, and bring back the bodies of the crew. There should have been 3 guys in here, but it's likely they were never here in the first place. All the food is untouched. The water tank is full. Power is nominal. It doesn't even look as if it left the ground. When we made our initial approach, it was a bit dirty on the outside, kind of a rusty brown, but the inside was immaculate. I went in first to find the seats empty, and when I turned around, the door was closed. I thought it was a prank at first, that those clowns had shut me in there as a bad joke. So I tried to open the door from the inside, but there was this. Well, it was an infinity symbol, but it wasn't painted on. It's hard to describe. It was kind of like how water refracts light, only with more depth. Like there was a whole other dimension in there. I could tell it was flat, but at the same time, it wasn't. I wish I had the words for it. Of course, I start freaking out and just rip the door open as fast as I can. I fly through the hole, and I'm back inside the pod. So I start freaking out. I can still see the other guys outside, just floating there, pointing at the pod, looking around as if they can't find me. God, it was so long ago now.
He got to his feet, hunched over, and took another look at the porthole, just in case.
Of course, they left, floated right back over to the craft and went back to Earth, without me. I tried the radio. It was the first thing I did. Houston, Pasadena, Kennedy. When they didn't reply, I tried Madrid, Sydney, Moscow.
He pushed open the hatch door again, turning the handle and pressing it open to reveal another copy of the pod on the other side. Floating through, he found the same as before, the same as every time, with the door already closed behind him as though he'd never opened it in the first place. He spun back around, already resigned to the fact that it would be shut tight.
I didn't get a reply, just static. As time went on, I tried every frequency, and I mean every frequency, again, and again, and again, and again. Nothing but static. They couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear them. It was like I was in a Faraday cage, only worse, and I had no way of getting out of here. It felt like it was years before I heard the radio crackle back, but I remember how excited I was to hear a voice on the other side after so long in solitude. It felt like being released from prison, or hearing you were free from cancer, or giving birth to your first child. It was that level of excitement 100 times over. I listened intently, but it was me. It was me. Those messages I sent to Mission Control had shot off into space and come right back to me, just like the ship had. God, I sounded so desperate. Just hearing the tone of my voice, I relieved the fear I had at the time, and the frustration that it wasn't Earth calling back broke something in me.
He began to sputter and sob softly as the memories hunted him, still staring out into empty, black space.
I couldn't do it anymore. I smashed that pod up. I smashed it good and proper. I tried to crack the windows open and get myself sucked out into space. But they were too strong. I bashed my head against the walls, but I did more damage to them than myself. I remember my fists broken and bloody after that. I could barely open the hatch through the pain.
Looking up from the porthole, he stared at the symbol before him, a tiny squiggle of numbers too massive to extrapolate. The infinity symbol was long gone, replaced by a number within that infinity.
I got through though, only to find my hands fixed in the pod the way I found it in the first place. So I smashed it up again. I pulled out the electronics, I tore at the cables, and poured water over everything. I tried everything I could, everything. And then I cried. I just cried.
He gave another weak sob and sniffled through the whirring background noise of fans.
God. Every time I go through that damn hatch, the number changes. For a while there, I tried to keep a track of it, or watching as the numbers swap and change. But it honestly meant nothing to me. I couldn't figure it out. I doubt Einstein could have figured it out. I thought maybe there was some kind of trick to it, that if I could solve it, then I could claim my freedom. Even with all the time in the world, I just couldn't bring myself to work it out. Math was never my strong point. It took me longer than it should have to figure out that I wasn't aging. My nails and beard stopped growing. But I watched the world go by below me, twinkling lights at night growing bigger and brighter as the world's cities grew. Hurricanes and storms creeping across the oceans. I saw the ice caps melt, lands grow flooded and vanish beneath the waves. I saw the green vegetation covering the planet grow brown, while the seas grew dark. Those lights from the cities dwindled. I realized I was watching civilization pass by before me. Oh, not in a flash or anything. No. Day by day, week by week, year after damn year, I was the same. But before my eyes, I was watching in painfully slow detail as humanity ruined itself, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it. All I could do was think. There was some paper, so I took to drawing the things I saw and what I imagined was happening down there. As soon as I left through the hatch again, it would be gone, but at least that gave me something to do. I would write messages, even though I knew nobody would ever read them. I wrote to my wife a lot. I knew after a while she would have found somebody else.
He paused, contemplating his memories with her.
I don't even remember her now. She's long dead. They all are. I hate that I can't even picture her face anymore. I can still feel what she was like, but I wish I brought a photo up here with me. You know, we had an argument before all this happened. She didn't want me coming up here. Of course she didn't. She couldn't have known it would be this bad, though.
He shook his head.
I should have listened to her. I tried to reassure her. I trusted the guys on the ground. It wasn't like I was going to Jupiter or anything. It was just an orbit, and I'd done it before. I wasn't afraid. Eventually, ship after ship left the planet. Everybody who was still left alive fled. I saw them leaving in different directions, so hopefully there are still people out there somewhere. I wish I could have moved this thing and followed them. Sometimes I wonder what happened to them all. When you have all the time in the world and only yourself, you have a lot of time to think. Thinking is all well and good, but I just wish I knew for sure that humanity continued. Anyway, the sun began to expand. I couldn't really tell. Seeing it every day, you don't get a point of reference for the difference, but it completely swallowed Mercury and Venus, eventually becoming a red giant and taking what was left of Earth into itself. I had to wait billions of years, but I got one hell of a view when it collapsed. It left a white dwarf behind in a cloud of nebulous gas. Billions more years later, it changed into a brown dwarf, and then a black dwarf. I'd taken to counting the stars left in the sky. The light traveling across the sky for millions of years eventually twinkled out, star by star, until there was nothing left. I'm surprised. I'm still this lucid, but I think each time I cross over the hatch, it somehow keeps me going. I wish it could stop the suffering too. I wish it could just set me free. So that brings us to now. I keep hopping through the hatch, hoping that something will change. I keep looking at the numbers, but they're not much help either. The only thing I can do is wait until a black hole comes along and sucks me up. But even then, I don't know if I'll be allowed to die or not. Maybe this stupid thing will still be intact inside there. I'm going to end the recording here. I might listen back to it. Maybe it'll be some comfort. I want to tell myself that I can do this, but I don't know what it is that I'm doing. I don't know why I'm trapped here. I don't know if I'll ever get out. But I wanted to just die and get it over with billions of years ago. If that's not suffering, I don't know what is. Godspeed, Rocket Man. Find your peace.
The recording ended with a... Years passed. Decades and eons soon followed. Millennia passed by in the blink of an eye, compared to the time he'd already spent aboard the craft, and black holes collided distantly, undergoing atrophy into radiation as they crawled across the sky. Everything was dark, cold, and dead. He was all that was left of any rational universe, the final testament that humanity had existed. Proof that mankind was there as an immortal reminder of our arrogance. He spent his many days much the same way, drawing and writing, singing to himself, trying desperately to stay busy or sleep the time away. He tried hovering between the hatches, closing the door on himself as far as it would go, but nothing ever changed. He awoke one morning to the same things as ever. A pristine cabin, an endless night. The disorienting space around him offered no solace. The universe had ended, not with a bang, but with a whispered whimper as space arrived at its terminus, the state of maximum entropy.
Oh, God. I just woke up and something changed after all this time. Oh, God. It's different.
He sounded elated. Nervous, anxious laughs burst like rising bubbles from his chest.
I'm seeing a zero with a line through it. Kind of an oval, really.
An inaccessible cardinal. A number that cannot be obtained from smaller numbers, no matter how many you add. A number so large that it exists beyond and above infinity, unobtainable through ordinary means. Infinites added together still cannot reach it, even when combined or put into different orders and added on top still. Truly, unfathomably endless.
The number has gone, and that's all that's left. It's small, but it's something different. It's different. The universe is dead, and yet here I remain. Maybe it's my turn now. I have no idea what's waiting for me on the other side. The porthole is still the same, but the number has never looked like this before. Should I bring something with me? Will I need the food?
He paused for a moment and shuffled around in the cabinets next to him, taking down dehydrated meals and pouches of water.
All right. I've gathered up what I can carry. I'm bringing the paper with me as well. I'm hoping that it's just death on the other side, but who knows? I've lived up here longer than all the lives of everything put together. Every person, every animal and insect, every plant, stacked their lives together, and I've still been here longer. Just me and empty space. I'm ready to die. I've been ready for forever. This will be my final recording. If anybody but myself hears this, well, I don't know what to tell you, really. Nothing matters. Everything dies in the end. Love conquers all. No, there's no point to life outside of what you make it. Up here for so long, I can tell you, there is no God. Not from what I've seen, and I've seen everything.
He placed his hand on the metal pole and pushed it down with a quivering hand. The metal thunked and echoed through the craft, reverberating softly back into his hand.
I'm going through for what I hope will be the last time. Wish me luck.
He pushed his way through the hatch with trembling anticipation. There could be anything on the other side, or everything. It could be a new chance at life, or the sweet release of death. Whatever awaited him, he was ready for, as long as it was something other than the timeless prison he'd endured. As he floated through, he couldn't quite understand what he was seeing. In the distance was the hatch of the pod from the outside, with its brown dusty coating and gentle light radiating from the porthole. At first glance, it seemed reasonably normal, with exception to the number now shining from the outside of the hatch. Aleph Null, the collective sum of the set of all integers, containing all possible cardinal numbers and arrangements of infinity. It gleamed and glistened with greater depth than should have been afforded it, falling back and forward as if it were a hologram, but also aging and renewing seemingly at will, as it caused the surrounding metal to corrode and shine, to buckle and bend and straighten out again. There was a rippling gravity to it, bending and warping the very nature of reality as he beheld its mysterious properties. He moved towards it only to notice that his body was no longer there. The consciousness, the ego, the self that made up who he was, and the collective experiences that shaped him had become liberated from their physical form. Either he moved or the space around him moved as he willed it. He wasn't quite sure which, and the position of the pod changed with him. It faded from view like a lenticular print, being viewed at a different angle, and at the same time, another version of the pod faded into view with a slightly different symbol. Aleph 1, an equal but separate infinity. The distance between the hatch and him was indeterminable. It could have been right next to him or on the other side of space, moving against a background not of light nor dark, not of space and distance, but nothing. True nothing beyond human reasoning, without height or length, distance or time, as though everything was fixed into a single point that was both everywhere and nowhere, all at once. As his consciousness continued to flow through this strange place, if it was a place at all, an infinite number of Apollo pods flickered in and out of reality, the number below the Aleph changing as his psyche traversed this bizarre realm. He'd grown accustomed to looking through the porthole of the capsule in his timeless solitude, perhaps in unwitting preparation for this very moment. As through each one, the beginning and end of the universe passed by in an instant, and from it, he knew all that each hatch held within. Each version of the pod held within its own probabilities, its own infinity, a different version of the events that had transpired within the history of the universe. Some were similar, but the higher the number became, the more twisted and warped the world had become. There were even worlds where humanity never emerged, where the Earth never formed, and some where the laws of physics were gnarled and broken beyond recognition. Every arrangement of every possibility presented itself before him, sharing their secrets with an instantaneous, unspoken understanding transferred directly to his psyche, with little more than a glance through the glass. Through this maddening amount of information, he observed a purpose, the intent of all of this. He didn't know how. He didn't have to know how. But he knew that he caused it to happen. Another pod, another hatch appeared. Like the true original, there was no number. But unlike all the rest, nothing came from the porthole. No view into the birth and death of the universe. No understanding of the possibilities within it. No intimate view into every minute detail. As with the area around him, there was no light or dark. No space on the other side. Just the purest, most concentrated nothingness. This was why he was here. With sheer force of will alone, he pulled down the bolt and pushed open the hatch slowly, picturing in the greatest detail the world that he wanted on the other side. From nothing came everything. Without dimensions, he emerged into a dense explosion of superheated plasma, containing all matter as dimensions ballooned out from the hatch, and he followed its rapid expanse and cooling. Witnessed gravity pulling matter together to form clouds of hydrogen that ignited into stars. He saw those same stars burst into vibrant clouds of dust and form new stars entirely. Around him, the universe took shape, Stars churned out denser matter, and dust clouds formed asteroids, which in turn formed planets. The cycle went on and on until he had formed his ideal Earth, setting into motion the events that were to unfold as he saw fit. He shaped the first proteins clinging to volcanic geysers underwater that formed into cells, guided the evolution of life into plants and animals, followed their progress into more and more complex beings. He had the arsenal of a god in his imagination, and through simply wishing something it would become so, unhampered by the complex systems of human physiology, unburdened by a finite brain. He was free to act as he wished. He walked unseen across the face of the planet with time, an irrelevant aspect to him, bearing witness to the world and people he had created, until finally meeting his mother. His time was at hand, and his work was complete. He wasn't sure if he'd remembered the pilgrimage he had taken, but it didn't matter. Even godhood couldn't avert the solitude. He was ready. His rebirth had been one part of his plan for this universe, relinquishing control over it so that he could live and that he may one day die in peace. He rendered himself to nothing more than an egg and waited, growing, biding his time, until at last he took his first screaming, wildly gasping breaths of the air he'd willed into existence. He was home. Hey creepypasta fans, it's Keon. Thanks for listening tonight. If you'd like to connect and support us, make sure to check out our Patreon and Discord links in the description below. A special thanks to Moonlight Hunter for this story. And remember, stay cosmic.
Julia, I'm sorry. work. I peered into the darkness, the endless expanse of space and time, and something looked back at me. Well, NASA doesn't train for the impossible, and that's what I saw. The impossible. It was far away at first, a small glimmer that got closer the longer I watched. Eventually, I could tell that it was a moving shell, like an oval coffin rushing through space. It approached my ship fast at first. If I hadn't been so spellbound, I would have ordered the shuttle to move away. But no matter how hard I resisted, I could not stop watching. The closer it got, the more it slowed, until it was hovering right in front of me. A metallic oval, like a teardrop that had fallen from the eyes of God itself. Years spent at NASA taught me that there is nothing unexpected to be found in space anymore, especially on the outskirts of Earth. It's called known space for a reason. But this thing floating just in front of me, I had no idea what it was or where it came from. All I could do was stare. NASA would have probably wanted me to report in, to verbally document what I was experiencing. A self-aware me would have chosen not to for self-preservation. But the truth is, I had no control over myself up there. I was weak. I was powerless. But I was not alone. Just a second, Jules. I'll be out soon. Meet you downstairs in a few moments for dinner. The object in space seemed to call to me. It pulled me to it like an invisible tether. I pushed myself off the satellite and floated towards the metal oval. Using the emergency jet system NASA installed on all our suits, I positioned myself just in front of the object. It looked as if something was inside. I put my hands to it. I could feel the freezing cold even through my gloves. I leaned my helmet close to the surface. I tried to look inside. I saw... Oh, come on, Julia! I need to finish these logs for NASA! I promise I'll be down in just a minute! I saw it. It stared back at me. It moved like I did. It blinked when I blinked. It was me, Jules. It looked exactly like me. I pushed it away and screamed. I ended the mission early and ordered us to go back. I couldn't tell the others what I saw. They wouldn't have believed me. Or worse, they would have reported me to NASA. Even when we were breaking atmosphere and re-entry, I could still feel it. I could feel it looking at me. And that's when I realized I hadn't escaped it. It was still there. It was on the ship with us. You're not Julia, are you? What? What the hell do you want? You to be you. I did it, Jules. I killed myself. I killed myself. I killed myself.
War ravaged throughout the dark cosmos. The entire third universe shivered under the force of his steps as the stars watched in dread. He was a mighty and terrifying being, one of the first primordials, and only the mighty cosmic beings dared to war against his will. He desired to rule over the entire multiverse, and only the primordials stood a chance against him. This was a battle for gods, and not mortals. He was known by many names, but only one has stood the test of time. Mozzarel, destroyer of worlds. The Battle of Mozzarel raged for ages in the third universe, and losses were heavy. The primordials soon began to diminish in number, but Mozzarel was an immortal. They decided to seal him and his minions with their last life force in an eternal realm of darkness. The Sphere of Hexagon, they called it. Lost for eternity in the dark cosmos. Everyone in the bar had stopped to listen to his tale. It began with a small chuckle, but it soon grew into a roar of laughter. The loud uproar which emanated from the neon bar could be heard from a few blocks away. Captain White and his team were not left out of all the fun. They beat their chests and hit their bottles of gin against the wooden table to control their amusement. "Tell that to the kids, boy," one of the men let out. Captain White gave the boy a stern look. The boy had claimed to see something that looked like the description of the Sphere of Hexagon hovering in space during their last flight near the Pluton orbit. Even though this was his first space trip, White knew that Roran was not making his story up. He had heard the tales of Mozzarel and the Sphere of Darkness, but he seldom paid much attention to it until now. "He's a good storyteller, I'll give him that," another man jeered from a corner. The boy hurried out of the bar in shame. He was sure that he had seen something. Captain White and his men had entered into planet Earth of the second universe not long ago, and Roran had seized the opportunity to search through Earth's archives. Earth's information archives were a lot more limited than they had on his planet. The inhabitants of Earth called it the Internet. It was enough to give him the information he needed anyway, and he could not be mistaken. It was the same object he had seen in the Pluton orbit. They were still engrossed in all the fun when a grumpy voice sounded from the far end of the bar. "There they are. Time to go, boys," Captain White let out. They were space marauders who journeyed from planet to planet, across the multiverse on an unending adventure. Some folks called them space pirates, and Earth, just like many other planets, had branded them wanted. Everyone in the group sprung into action as bullets danced in the air. The bar owner could be heard screaming, "My bar!" in the distance, as Captain White and his men made it out of the place, fleeing towards their space shuttle. On the pilot's seat in the Eagle space shuttle, Tim rocked his head to Sia's Guts Over Fear, humming to the music. "Ah, Earth's music never gets old," he mused. A voice suddenly blared through the speakers. It was Captain White.
"Tim, fire up the damn shuttle!"
he exclaimed. Tim jerked from his oblivious state and fired up the engines as the men trooped into the ship. Captain White always felt the sting of being branded a terrorist on his home planet, but it was the life he had chosen and he had no regrets. Roran was the last to speed in, and Captain White stopped him just before he ran past. "We need to talk, boy," he said calmly. Roran swallowed hard. The Eagle space shuttle wasted no time in thundering out of Earth's borders as several other spaceships trailed them from behind. They'll be damned if they caught up to the Eagle. Captain White's ship was one of the fastest in the galaxy. "Are you sure of what you saw, boy?" Captain White leaned towards Roran and whispered, "Yes, sir, I am," he replied almost instantly. The men gathered round, and they looked hungry for another adventure. "Where to, Captain?" they all chorused. Captain White stared at Roran for a moment, before shifting his gaze towards the rest of his crew as a tiny smirk escaped his lips. "Set coordinates to the Pluton orbit. Let us see if there is some truth in our boys' tales." Everyone in the crew laughed aloud, but they liked the idea. Roran was the youngest and newest member of the team, but they had all seen crazy things in their many years of travel and adventures, and they knew best not to disbelieve rumors just like that. Most rumors always had some element of truth in them. Alright then. Pluton orbit it is, Tim playfully let out. They soon arrived at their destination, and Roran was right. Something hovered in the dark space, close to the Pluton orbit. There was an eerie feel around it, and ominous vibrations emanated from the massive spherical structure. The sphere of Hexagon, Tim whispered. There was more fear than amusement in his words. The ancient object looked terrifying. Why is this here? What made it emerge after so many years? I thought this was a famous myth told to scare space travelers. Several questions left Tim's lips. The entire crew was obviously terrified, as flashes of Roran's tales now reverberated in their thoughts. What if Mozzarella was still in there? Tim thought. Aren't we meant to be the most wanted mortals in the multiverse? Come on, let's check it out, someone said. I think we should stay as far as possible away from this place, Roran replied almost instantly. Captain White had been quiet. He yearned for adventure, but if the tales were true, then this was definitely beyond them. The entire crew was now staring at him, waiting for his next command. I'd say we've been through a lot together, and this wouldn't be a bad way to die, he joked. Who knows what riches lie in there? The entire crew soon burst into a loud roar of laughter. Come on, Tim, Captain White let out. Buckle up. It's time to dine with the gods. This is a bad idea, Roran warned. Well, this was your idea, Captain White replied, as the Eagle space shuttle sped towards the sphere. There was a strange silence that engulfed the sphere, and a thick fear and suspense hovered in the atmosphere as they neared the object. Roran swallowed hard. His knees trembled in fear. He had read so much about this place, and he feared what terror awaited them within the sphere. Roran, you know much more about this place than we. Lead the way. The Eagle space shuttle landed on the sphere. Roran's heart began to pound. He knew that even if the tales of Mozzarella were not true, whatever lurked within the sphere was not good. The entire aura was filled with various hints of danger. Roran looked uneasily at Captain White before proceeding out of their spaceship and towards the sinister-looking object. The ancient primordials sealed off this place. The primordials were literal gods, and Roran was certain that it would take much more than a bunch of space marauders to open the doors of the sphere of Hexagon. They had no plan, no key, and no knowledge about the strange object. He was wrong, as it turned out. As he approached the sphere, the surface gave way, revealing a passage. This is not right. This door should be almost impossible to open, Roran mused. The crew proceeded into the sphere, except for Tim, who stayed back with the ship, as usual. They followed the narrow path deep into the sphere, led by Roran. Something feels weird about this place. I think we should just go back, one of the men suggested. Captain White wanted to protest, but he thought about the safety of his crew. They were right. They knew nothing about this new territory, and it would be foolish to proceed. Where's Brick? Roran asked. They all paused. Thick silence crept in as soon as they discovered that Brick was truly missing. Brick! Captain White called out, but all they got back were the echoes of his voice. Brick! Brick! He couldn't have gone that far, one of the men suggested. Confusion slowly began to creep on their faces as they searched for Brick, and Captain White soon found him. Brick, what are you doing? Captain White asked. Brick ignored him. He seemed to be in some sort of trance. He held a strange object in his hands. It pulsated, like a container for a large amount of energy. He's going to activate the key. He wants to free his army. Roran sped towards Brick, but was hurled back by an invisible force. Brick muttered a few words before burying the object into a carving, shaped like the object on the floor. Whose army? Captain White asked. An obvious question, but somewhere in his consciousness, he still thought the reality of the tales about Mozzarella being true. Mozzarella might have been trapped, but his essence still had control over the atmosphere. Brick began to jerk strangely and soon dropped to the ground. Brick, Captain White whispered. Brick was dead. The entire place began to tremble as Captain White and his men made it out of the place. Suddenly, everywhere fell quiet. Not a single sound could be heard, except their fleeting footsteps and beating hearts. They stopped, scanning through the entire place. They needed to get out, Captain White thought. He had watched Brick die in seconds. Something powerful was definitely at work, but the silence only lasted for a while. Out of nowhere, massive, otherworldly creatures sprang from all corners of the sphere. Captain White and his team pulled out their various weapons. "We're all going to die here!" one of the men in the team cried. Their weapons had little effect on the creatures as they rained several shots towards the incoming threat. It was a massacre. White could hear the dying screams of his men. They should never have walked into this dreadful place. Mozzarella's minions were ruthless, tearing everything apart in a dreadful manner. The creatures were about 7 feet with distinct horns sitting atop their heads, their tails dancing in the darkness as they moved about. They were a shade of rusted brown, with metallic armor fastened to their entire body. They were apocalyptic. Captain White and his men had traveled far and wide into the entire 5 universes, and this was the most dreadful thing they had ever seen, and perhaps the last. He watched in terror as they were all torn apart. Roran and Captain White raced away from the growing chaos and sprinted into a dark path which instantly closed up, revealing a massive chamber. They turned slowly. Something else was in there. Something massive. Mozzarella, destroyer of worlds, lay bound in chains. They were like cockroaches before him. Captain White soon began to stroll towards him. Roran knew that he was being controlled. Mozzarella had probably found a way to free himself, but it seemed as though he needed a human to free him. He had read in one of the tales about how Kronos, the primordial from the earth, managed to seal him in an eternal time loop. Perhaps that was why he needed a human. If not, his minions would have done the job for him. Captain White strolled towards an object, similar to the one Brick had earlier used to free Mozzarella's minions. It pulsated with a powerful surge of energy. "The time key of Kronos," Roran whispered. "He wants to free himself." "Captain, please, you can fight this!" Roran struggled to speak. He didn't know what Captain White was being controlled to do, but whatever it was, he didn't want to find out. "Break out from his hold!" Roran cried. "You could still save the world, Captain!" Roran's voice echoed throughout the chamber. Captain White began to fight back. He had a powerful will, and he directed his focus on Roran's voice, and for a moment, it worked. The fate of everything that lived rested on his shoulders. He seized the opportunity. Mozzarella had revealed his intentions to White, and he instantly darted towards the time key of Kronos and shut it. Captain White screamed as blood streamed down from his nostrils. Suddenly, the Eagle space shuttle thundered into the room, taking out everything before its path. The space shuttle had more firepower and a lot more effect on Mozzarella's army. The entire place trembled from Mozzarella's wrath. A mere mortal had fought against his will and won. "We need to stop his army too," Roran let out as they climbed aboard the ship. Tim stared in shock.
Where are the rest of the team?
Tim asked. Roran shook his head sideways. Tim felt sober, but he couldn't afford to lose focus. There was still work to be done. He guided the spaceship towards the room where Brick had earlier activated the key, and Roran hopped from the ship and separated the pulsing object. The approaching army all dropped to the ground.
We need to go,
Tim said. Roran immediately returned into the space shuttle, and Tim boomed out of the sphere of Hexagon and into space. All had almost been lost. If Mozzarella had risen, nothing would have been able to stop him. Tim and Roran watched as Captain White shut his eyes in death. Tim fell to the ground, weeping profusely as Roran stared at the sphere which was still hovering in this distance. He knew that this was not going to be the end. Mozzarella was still going to lure some unaware travelers into his trap. They were lucky, Roran thought. They were able to stop his emergence before it completed its cycle. But it had cost the entire team. The next group might not be that lucky, and the world was not ready for a being like Mozzarella. Roran prayed in his heart that the sphere of Hexagon would return to whatever darkness it emerged from. Lost forever in the dark cosmos, as it has been for ages.
This is Jack Byers of Hugo Spacecraft 59X2. I'm requesting that this ship be shot down before entry into Earth's stratosphere. Poseidon has been compromised by unidentified extraterrestrials, and we have lost command of the spacecraft. If you receive this message, do not allow the spacecraft to make it to Earth. I repeat, do not allow this spacecraft to enter Earth. They're coming. Out there. They're coming for everyone.
Ryan was the first to hear the message. His heart skipped as he listened to each word. They thought they had lost Hugo 59X2 in space, but this new message changed everything. Who is coming? He wondered. That was obviously Jack's voice. He had worked with Jack for years, and he would recognize his voice anywhere. If this message was just coming in, that means it had been sent several days or weeks ago. Hugo 59X2 had been confirmed lost in space for weeks, but this message changed everything. What was Jack talking about? He sounded terrified over the radio message. Extraterrestrials, Ryan wondered. Was this some sort of joke? Obviously not. Jack was always too focused and disciplined with his work to mess around with such important stuff. This was real. Ryan was perplexed as he replayed the message over and over. At least, this meant that the spacecraft wasn't actually lost, but hijacked. Ryan just couldn't make much sense out of the strange message. He was still pondering the nature of the short message when a blip appeared on the radar. He looked closer into the satellite feed. It was Hugo 59X2. Oh my god, he exclaimed as he jumped to his feet. This is fucking madness. He had to tell the rest. This is Jack of the Hugo Spacecraft 59X2, reporting to the Mission Space Command Center. Can anyone hear me? That was the upteenth time I had tried to contact the Mission Space Tower back on Earth to brief them about the sudden twist of events, but I received no reply once again. A few weeks ago, Poseidon had intercepted a strange signal and attempted to decipher it. That was our mistake. We should have shut him down immediately, but we did not. His program was soon corrupted, and he began to receive commands from another dictator. This was supposed to be an easy mission to the space station on Mars, but everything had changed. We had lost communication with the command center on Earth, and Poseidon was now in full command of the ship. Poseidon had changed our coordinates, jammed our signals, and was now heading towards an unknown destination. Something was luring him further into the dark space, but the question in everyone's heart was, are we going to die? We had been flying through space for about 2 months, according to Earth time, when we came in contact with a dark, sinister object hovering somewhere in space.
Sir, I think you need to see this.
Mark's voice sounded from the speakers. Mark was also an astronaut on the ship, and the sound of his voice told me something wasn't right. I stared at the massive, sinister object which hovered in front of us when Poseidon had brought our ship to a sudden halt in front of it. Whatever had been controlling Poseidon was now right in front of us. The otherworldly object was stealth black. No one had uttered a word since we stopped. Everyone's jaws had dropped as we stared in shock at the stark object which hovered before us, mocking our ship with its grandiose appearance. Poseidon's synthetic voice broke the silence.
Commencing sequence,
Poseidon said.
What sequence?
Mark barked back. We all didn't know what to expect. We were gripped by fear and suspense. We begged for words, but we found none. We had exhausted all our options as we clinged tightly to hope. Poseidon! Override sequence now!
voice recognition confirmed. Thank you, Jack.
Poseidon replied. Voice what? Oh, crap! I let out in frustration.
Hugo hatch door unlocking sequence initiated.
Poseidon continued. Pandemonium immediately broke out amongst us as everyone searched for a way to shut down Poseidon. He seemed to have shut us off all the control systems and access points where he could be shut down. We had just been beaten by our very own creation. What could possibly be lurking beyond the walls of this massive, sinister object, I thought. Whatever was inside the dark, disc-like structure obviously had more advanced technology to have successfully hacked into Poseidon's program. Poseidon was one of the best artificial intelligence supercomputers back on Earth, but he had been hacked in seconds.
Unlocking Hugo hatch door in 5, 4, 3.
Everyone suddenly stopped what they were doing as we all turned toward the hatch door, bracing ourselves for anything. All our efforts to shut down Poseidon had been futile, and we now held tightly to hope.
2, 1.
Poseidon went silent, and his robotic voice was replaced by the sound of the spacecraft's door. We all put on our oxygen masks. Even oxygen didn't seem like much of a luxury to us at that moment. Everyone held their breaths in expectation of what was to come. We waited for a while, but nothing happened. Our gazes remained fixed towards the vast space beyond the door, searching for anything that moved in the darkness. A loud screech suddenly resounded from the sinister object as I shifted my gaze towards the spaceship in front of us. Mark had refused to take his eyes off the door. The sound was like a strange wave of signals traveling through space. Something began to move in a compartment of the object as an ominous noise erupted all around it, like some sort of door. We all continued to stare curiously at the strange turn of events as our hearts pounded audibly. Something was coming out from the object. We were all gripped by shock to utter words. All we could do was watch as the events unfolded. We had been staring for minutes, but we all saw nothing. Poseidon soon broke the silence.
Lockdown sequence activated. Welcome aboard, sir.
Somehow, his robotic voice haunted all of us. Welcome aboard. But we had not seen anything. We were creeped out when the doors began to close.
New coordinates received.
Poseidon continued.
Destination, Earth.
We were just astronauts on a space mission to Mars. We never signed up for any of this. Mark was already trembling underneath his spacesuit. Who wouldn't? Our spacecraft soon began to retreat back towards the route we had just come from. What just happened? Mark let out in confusion. Everything seemed normal. We expected some sort of alien invasion, but nothing had happened, or so we thought. Something still seemed off about the encounter. I was convinced that something had happened and we were simply missing out on a big chunk of the puzzle. Poseidon had been translating a weird frequency ever since we retreated from the large space object. Something was already giving him orders, and I was bent on finding out. I grabbed my tablet and walked calmly into a hidden corner on the ship as I attempted to hack one last time into Poseidon's programming to at least decipher the frequency. After several failed attempts, I finally succeeded in gaining access into Poseidon's language catalog, and I quickly deciphered the frequency. I synced the frequency into Poseidon's translation update, which he had earlier received from whatever had taken command of his program, and searched for the English translation. Something was transmitting from our ship to another frequency. Probably the other object. I guessed it was a spaceship of some sort. I listened to Poseidon's translation module. There were several distorted translations which Poseidon didn't really get right, but in the chaotic attempt to translate an alien language, a few key words which were perfectly translated was enough to help me understand the message. Infiltrate ship. Hosts ready to control. Take over planet. Invade. The translation was messed up, but it was clear enough. Domination of the Earth. The question which now plagued my mind was, who infiltrated our ship? We had not noticed any signs of. Unless I initiated a quick scan of our ship, using Poseidon's radio frequency wave detector.
Alert. Malware detected. Attempted language hack detected. Logging off unauthorized access.
Poseidon had detected the hack, but I had already seen what I needed to. I grabbed my radio and sent a quick message recording to the Space Mission Control Tower back on Earth. That's why they couldn't attack us directly. Of course, I mused. They needed hosts to survive on Earth, and we were the unlucky bunch of astronauts who fell right into their perfect plan. Dark entities, vibrating at a very fast frequency. Perhaps that is why we couldn't see them. They looked like the Parasite from the Venom movie, I thought. I felt sad that Poseidon, an artificial supercomputer that I had invested so much into, along with several top scientists to create, had now come back to haunt us. Poseidon soon managed to shut me off from its program, but it was just after I had caught a glimpse of the alien parasite taking over the bodies of the other astronauts as their loud screams echoed throughout the spacecraft. There was obviously nowhere to run to, so I sat in wait, preparing to be taken over by these alien invaders. Ryan played the recording in front of the entire space agency as they listened in confusion. What was going to be their next decision? Were they going to blast off the spacecraft containing one of the most advanced AI supercomputers in the world because of a voice recording? They knew that something was obviously suspicious about the disappearance and sudden reappearance of Hugo 59X2, but an alien hijack. They laughed it off as a mere joke. There are no such things as aliens, many of them said. Ryan was convinced that Jack was telling the truth as he worked tirelessly to attain communication with Hugo 59X2, and he eventually did, but it came off a huge surprise when Jack's voice finally came through the radio, debunking Ryan's claims that the previous message was from him and giving a detailed explanation of the various challenges they had faced on the trip, which made them to lose radio connection with the Space Mission Control Tower back on Earth and the reason for their return, blaming it on a slight malfunction of Poseidon's program. Ryan was immediately fired for falsification of information. The space agency allowed Hugo 59X2 back into Earth's atmosphere and greeted the astronauts warmly. They had just welcomed Earth's doom. I awoke from a terrible nightmare. Where? For a moment, I regained consciousness of what had happened. It had been a few days since we touched down on Earth's surface, and I had no memory of it. I attempted to make a quick phone call when a crushing pain invaded my head and threw me off my bed as I groaned loudly in pain with my hands over my ears. In an instant, something took over my entire being and consciousness as I rose up calmly and strolled out of the room. I needed to feed the darkness into as many people as I could before the invasion. Somewhere in the dark corners in the room, Ryan watched in utter shock.
Live transmission will start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
My face filled the screen, blotchy and indistinct in the straggly light of dusk. The camera struggled to find its focus, and the whole picture blurred, before clearing up again, elucidating the sharp lines of my jaw, the uneven ridge of my nose. The rest of my features, the freckles, the faded acne scars, were too faint to make out. The street lamps outside the apartment had flickered off a few minutes ago, and the watery rectangles of light from people's windows had blacked out too, plunging the whole street into darkness. The thin sliver of the moon emitted barely enough light to create shadows, and the stars had not come out tonight, making everything seem depthless and impenetrable. A void, lifeless and hollow. On the screen of my cell phone, the paleness of my cheeks and the faint glimmer of my eyes were the only things visible. Behind me, the darkness bled completely. I was right, I began. My voice came out strangely muted and far away, as though the darkness had somehow dampened it. I was right after all. This is the end for us. I paused, trying to gather my words together. I only had so much time, and yet so much to say. Everything had happened so quickly, so suddenly. Even now, my mind was reeling, trying to comprehend everything. Flicking a glance to the window, something moved against the dusk. A bird, winging by in silence, before disappearing behind the rooftops. Its pale gray wings catching the moonlight. When I returned my gaze to the screen, the face staring back seemed almost unfamiliar, a stranger in the dark, twisted by burgeoning fear and hopelessness. I no longer recognized myself. The whole street has gone dark, I continued, pouring strength into my words, fighting against the darkness, threatening to consume me. It's already starting. I hadn't thought they'd start so soon. I paused again to swallow, wetting my lips with my tongue. I don't have much time, but I'll say what I can. I shifted the phone to my hand as my fingers began to cramp. A streak of pale moonlight cut a shadow behind me, as though, for barely a second, I wasn't alone here. I continued. I can see everything from my window, but I have no doubt that every street across the city is out of power. This is how it begins. They suck us dry, so that we're powerless to stop them. So that we're blind and helpless in the dark. The energy they've taken is what they use to fuel the experiment. Such a large feat requires a large enough power source. The moment the lights went out, I knew what was happening. Each breath that tumbled from my lips fogged the screen of the cell phone, and the air I sucked in felt dry and warm, tingling against the back of my throat. I reached over and unlatched the window of my fifth-story apartment. A chilly draught swept in, stirring the hair around my face and making the light bulb above me swing with a gentle creak. There's a lab in the city across the bridge, I said, my voice wavering as the wind picked up, gusting through the room. In the distance, I heard a dog bark. A gate clanged open and shut. They advertise themselves as a simple research and development center, but that's just a facade. The intelligence that I've managed to gather shows that they're harboring some kind of particle accelerator. It's more advanced than anything I've seen or heard before, and their primary goal is use it to... I paused, shaking my head. My eyes darted to the corner of the screen where it was counting the recording time. Over 3 minutes already. I was running out of time. They're using it right now. That's why the lights are off. Not just in my apartment, but the whole street. Probably the whole city. They're planning to... Something thudded against the wall opposite me, and my whole body went still, eyes growing wide as I stared across the darkened room. Part of me expected to see eyes looking back, inhuman and strange, watching me from the shadows. But I was alone. It took me a long second to realize it was probably just my neighbors. Stumbling around in the dark, I forced my heart rate to slow down, channeling a deep breath through my nose. I lowered my voice to a furtive whisper, holding the phone closer so that my face filled the screen.
I've been led to believe that. No. I know that the scientists who work at the facility aren't what they seem. They're cultists, member of an ancient sect that transpired to summon the evil gods to our world. And now, they're trying again, abandoning religion and superstition for cold, hard science. They built the particle accelerator as a means to experiment. Their ultimate goal, to create a wormhole. They mean to summon a portal through which something dark and terrible will be able to enter our world.
My voice grew shaky again as fear took over. My skin flushed and then went cold, as though my body was becoming feverish. I moved closer to the window, my feet silent against the carpet. The smell of cigarette smoke and takeaway food drifted up towards me. The street itself was quiet and still. It seemed a strange contrast to the dread I was feeling inside. Nobody else knew what was happening. They basked in their ignorance. They would be guileless and naive until the end. But not me. I knew their secrets. I knew their lies. This was my last chance to expose them.
This darkness.
I whispered, lifting my gaze to the rooftops. The sky bled into the horizon itself, becoming indistinguishable. The houses and cityscape were nothing but a smudge in that gloom. A blemish on an obsidian world.
This darkness is not natural. It comes with the darkness. This ancient, primordial being that will come through the wormhole. The darkness is its calling. This is how it will find us, and we will be powerless to stop it.
The words fell from my mouth without comprehension, dredged up from the depths of my subconscious. Part of me barely knew what I was saying, but I was driven by a desire to keep speaking. This was my last chance, my last message. I drew in a shaky breath. Each thud of my heart seemed to shatter through my ribcage, so loud I thought the whole street would be able to hear it, if anyone was listening.
To those of you out there listening to me now, know that the end is coming. The world is no longer ours alone. If they succeed, a portal will be opened, and things will come through that we are not prepared to face. The Earth will belong to us, no more.
The night wind blew across my cheeks, drying a tear I did not realize had fallen. I blinked away the haze in my eyes. This wasn't a time to mourn.
This is it for me,
I said softly, trying not to let my voice betray the sadness and fear that was tearing through me. I wanted to sound strong, assured. I wanted my final moments to be filled with courage. The courage to end this. The courage to say goodbye to the world I knew before it became something strange and terrible.
This is the end. I don't want to be here to see the world fall to ruin.
I pushed the window open wider, as wide as it would go, and leaned against the ledge, looking down. The height was dizzying. The darkness swam like something alive, dredging things up in its tide. Fragments of voices and faces that no longer held any meaning. Shadows reached for me like arms, beckoning, inviting. The wind tugged at my hair. I turned back to look at the camera. I looked at my face, perhaps for the last time. The boy that stared back looked determined, strong. There was a firmness to his jaw, a shine to his eyes. Even as his voice trembled, his face did not waver. His fear did not seep through. "This is my last message to you. This darkness will not go away. What has been started cannot be stopped. Something is coming. Something terrible and monstrous. Escape it while you can, or see the world fall." The night beckoned around me. I felt the pull of gravity tugging me down. The wind whispered against my ear, inviting me into its embrace. "Let go," it said. "Let go and you will feel this fear no more." I had to do this. I had no choice. My words had been spoken. The world had been warned. I would not be here to see this darkness win. "I will not have the same fate as Robert Blake," I said, my final words before letting the night take me.
Live transmission ended.
Hundreds of years ago, in the vast expanse of empty space between Earth and Mars, humanity was given its first glimpse of a black hole up close. It appeared without reason, as though it simply decided to show up. There was no collision nor collapse, but looking through it, the light from distant stars sent thousands of years ago warped around its corona and was absorbed by its nigh infinite density. A black hole the size of a planet isn't large by any particular standards, but its repercussions were greatly felt and impacted life on Earth overnight for perpetuity. Our seasons, once a predictable cycle of waxing life and waning death, had ceased to be so inevitable as the intense gravity of another planet instantaneously interrupted the phases of life that we had depended on. As we orbited the sun, the gravity from the anomaly lengthened our year and pulled us away from the sun, only to swing closer to it as we left its pull. Parts of the planet had become entirely uninhabitable, be it to flooding, fires, freezing cold, or the ceaseless storms that our planet had succumbed to. From the flux of pressures due to the instability caused by its appearance, initially the rich survived, with entire countries being erased from the map, wiped clean off, labeled as no longer habitable. Those without access to water, to healthcare, to a safe place to stay away from the brutal conditions wrought by this calamity in the sky were obliterated with barely a tear for them. There were more pressing matters at hand than crying over spilled blood. Of those that survived the initial destruction, the world's finest minds were assembled and money practically thrown at them. The remainder of Earth's resources at their fingertips, in the hopes that they could make this world-ending problem go away. It was a little late to be giving the power to the people with the knowledge to make the right decisions, instead of self-serving politicians waging wars over petty squabbles or squandering assets fruitlessly. But better late than never. They began to study it immediately, and soon concluded that something else was on the other side. The life we had been looking for had also been looking for us, and it was something that could punch its way through the immensity of space. Something that was coming for us. The effects of the black hole weren't even a warm-up. That was just a coincidental side effect. Whatever it was that wielded such shattering power, they designated as the target. Somehow, they knew we still had time. Relativistic time. As the target approached us at incredibly high speeds, time for it slowed, giving humanity a brief window to make their chance to deal with this threat. Efforts to study how to dispose of a black hole amounted to nothing, and it was too late to find a habitable planet in a safe enough distance. So Earth's decision boiled down to an immense space station, armed with a cannon capable of planetary destruction. A crude, but appropriately human decision. At the time, the International Space Station housed a crew of 3 to 6 people, and yet they sought to build a spacecraft capable of housing and sustaining hundreds of thousands of people. The station had been aptly named the Spes Ultimum, and on a cloudless night was visible from the surface of Earth as a blinking light in the heavens, occasionally vanishing from view for weeks as it orbited the black hole. As it moved behind the event horizon, studious viewers with telescopes could watch as its light bent and warped around the black hole, illuminating its event horizon like a halo around the astronomical wonder. It had been built to be functional, and so luxuries were few and far between. Given the age of the parts that had been built initially, a great number of work hours were spent simply holding the beast together and making sure systems remained operational. In its earliest form, gravity had been an afterthought for the generations that followed, and railings still littered its oldest holes between tangled wires and long LED lights. Bit by bit, the monstrosity had been built with generations of work put into it, as they tried to catch it up to newer and better technologies. As it always does, time ran out. The final weeks before Instant Zero, as it had come to be known, were mainly checks on the huge amounts of systems throughout the station and the final inventory of its staff and stock. Everything else came to a standstill as the weeks turned to days, to hours, until finally, the one moment that had been hundreds of years in the making came to pass. Everybody aboard the Spes Ultimum, from high-ranking officers to janitors, had been invited to the viewing decks to watch the culmination of humanity's efforts as the clock ran down. Some people chose to avoid the crowds and watch from the other decks. Some foolishly waived the opportunity to watch at all. One man had little choice but to watch through the window of the infirmary from where he lay in his bed. Through the other side of the thick window, he watched the stars glitter and twinkle on their backdrop of empty darkness. Watching their outlines twist and bend to form a razor-thin ring on the outline of the black hole, and then vanish entirely as they passed behind it. From what he could see, there was nothing there other than a large circle of complete obscurity. There was a sweet irony in the fact that its complete nothingness, the lack of form, was the proof of its existence. Beneath the sheets, his leg had been cast in a hardened mycelium casing, and it itched terribly from the lack of ventilation. But watching what was about to unfold drew his mind from the discomfort. His attention was broken by a gentle shush from the door opening. The familiar face of his nurse glanced his way and smiled as he turned his head to greet her. "Shouldn't you be watching this?" he rumbled lazily. She made her way to the table at the side of his bed and put down a softly steaming meal. He arched his neck up to try and see vegetables and potatoes, alongside synthetic meat coated in a hearty-looking gravy, and fruit segments sat in a small cup of thick syrup for afterwards. He'd eaten worse. Without speaking, she walked over to the window and peered out. She turned her head and locked eyes with him. "I've still got time." In the hours counting down to the final moment, there had been the sounds of capacitors charging up and winding, coupled with the constantly building rumble from the center of the station as the cannon was charged, ready to release an ungodly amount of energy straight into the hole. He slid the tray onto his lap and started taking small bites of potato. "How long is it now?" he asked between mouthfuls with a strikingly casual tone, given the monumental gravity of the situation. "Only a few minutes to go. Everybody's in place. The cannon is charged, and all we have to do now is wait," she replied, staring back out the window. "We've already waited hundreds of years," he said, raising a carrot dripping with gravy up to his face. "I'm excited to just see it all be over."
I wouldn't say we've been doing nothing but waiting. We have the spes ultimum after all. And hope, he added in a tone that leaked sarcasm. She cocked her head towards him to roll her eyes dramatically. With a quick sweep, she brushed her dark hair back behind her shoulders and tied it up with a hairband she'd kept around her slender waist. Hope is better than giving up. She pulled up a chair next to his bed. She took a deep breath and released it in a long sigh as he continued eating. People used to put their hope into what they believed, that they could live forever and see their dead relatives again and be eternally happy, all by being a good person, she added, moving her gaze from the black hole down to his dwindling meal. She gripped the fruit cup and cracked it open. I'd rather my hopes be on the things we've achieved rather than the things we've imagined. The man let out a monosyllabic expression of reluctant agreement. I'd rather have the ultimum than trying to pray this thing away, she concluded, handing him the fruit cup. He lifted it to see his face and soaked away at the juice. Between his slurping, there was silence as she stared at the target. He put the cup down and issued a satisfied "ah" before opening his mouth to speak. Why are you watching it from here? Wouldn't you rather get a better view? He asked in a tone to suggest she go and enjoy the show. I can't just leave you on your own to watch it all unfold. She lied. He was just a patient to her, slightly more than a stranger, but she would have felt more alone in the vast crowd crammed into the viewing decks than with him. No boyfriend or husband to watch it with? No friends? There has to be somebody, he pressed. No boyfriend, no husband, just my work. Besides, I can get a better view from here. She replied without emotion. He knew she was hiding something, but he'd let her have her secrets. After a moment of silence between them, the man continued. I never got your name. Sola, she told him quickly before adding. I know, my parents weren't very creative people. Nice to properly meet you, Sola. He held out a hairy hand to shake hers. I'm Nai, she interjected with a vague grin. I've seen your report. I know all about you already. I hope it doesn't say anything bad about me. He smiled back. Abruptly, the ship emergency siren started to blare out, with a whining wail that silenced the conversation between them. They both waited awkwardly for it to finish. A familiar called out over the intercom, and a man's voice sounded over the speaker. This is your captain. We will soon be commencing our operation. Instant Zero will arrive shortly, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for your hard work aboard the Spes Ultimum, and to thank our crews back on Earth. You have brought honor and integrity to the human race, and without all of you up here, there would be no hope for those down there. The future of our species and all of life on our planet has been dependent on your efforts, and now there is nothing else to be done. Everybody, enjoy the show. Nai and Sola both perk up at the statement, staring at each other brightly. Here we go, I guess. Do you think it's going to work? Nai asked, moving his gaze back to the window. It doesn't matter what I think at this point. We're about to find out. From the all-consuming darkness of the black hole, there was a sudden wave of ionization that flickered the lights and tingled their skin as it passed through them for a second, followed by dark tendrils spewing out and riding along its magnetic field as the hole shifted and changed. Those scientists from so long ago were right about the timing, at least. More and more wisps erupted from its dark interior and wrapped around the body, warping and bending around the event horizon as they re-entered. There was a sudden flash that brightened the sky out the window, but remained dimmed around the hole, followed by a heavy rumble and shake from the entire station that rattled the bed. An uneasy look washed across Sola's face as she gripped the side of the chair in which she sat. An enormous wave rippled through the structure that knocked her to the ground as the cannon fired silently into space. The lights flickered again, but this time they went out for good. Without the red glow of the emergency lights, it was obvious to them both that the backup power was out too. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The ground hadn't stopped moving, and as the flash subsided, they could see stars shifting from through the window. Nye's finished plate started to rise from its place on the table, and even the table itself began to lift from the ground. The artificial gravity had failed, and they realized as they too began to float freely through the infirmary. "Oh shit! Shit!" Nye exclaimed, attempting to hold on to the bed and force himself back into it. Sola tried to grasp the chair and force it under the bed, thankful that the large pieces of furniture were secured for just an eventuality. "Are you alright?" she asked in a panicked tone, attempting to stow loose items that floated in the darkness. "I'm fine, but what happened?" Nye sputtered, his eyes fixed on the window. "I don't think we're attached to the station. Shit, look!" He pointed to the window, his other hand still gripping the bed. As their now freed section of the ultimum swung about, the large clouds of debris from the station came into view and eclipsed the stars. Hundreds of years of work, the culmination of humanity's existence, shattered and broken in a flash. Hundreds of thousands of lives extinguished instantly. Sola kicked herself off the floor and drifted over to the window to peer out. She didn't say anything, but Nye knew from the way her eyebrows drew together and her mouth sat agape that she didn't have any good news for him. "Stay here," she instructed before leaving the way she came. Nye just watched out the window and held himself in place, watching as the wreckage of the station swung back out of view, and a cloud of nebulous gas hung where the target had been. He could see the stars beyond where it had suspended in the sky. At least this gambit had worked. His mind drew to everyone else that was aboard the ship, to the people he'd worked with and the friends he'd made, all taken from him in an instant. He suddenly felt very alone. Sola appeared from the door, pulling herself in by the frame and floating over to him through the starlit darkness. "We're sealed in. I didn't find any leaks, so I think we should be alright for now," she said, trying not to think about the immediate future. "Did we get it?" she asked in a mixture of fear and excitement. Nye took a deep breath. "I think so. I can't really see much of anything." The view from the window swung past Earth, but there wasn't much to see, other than the millions of tons of spacecraft in pieces drifting lifelessly through space, covering their view. "The black hole is gone. That's something." "Did you see the target? Did it come out?" Sola questioned quickly. Just a big flash. Then everything fell apart." Nye answered, but he wasn't quite sure of what he'd seen. Everything was so sudden. Sola scanned the room, trying to find something to help their situation. The console on the wall was entirely black. There was no power to any of the systems. The lights were out, gravity was gone, and what air was locked in the room with them would soon become tainted and unbreathable. The heating system would be entirely broken too, and with no way of sending a signal to anyone, there was little hope that anybody would come for them. Even if they did, it was unlikely they'd even be able to reach them in time. Her eyes fell blank as she realized there wasn't anything that could help here. They were trapped in this piece of wreckage, floating through space, with no control over their destination and no certainty of their survival. "Well, we're We're well and truly fucked, aren't we? Nye whispered. Sola wanted desperately to try and disagree, to argue that there was still hope to cling on to, that someone would come by and pick them up. Beyond that, she wanted to say that the world was saved and that humanity would thrive again as they had before, but she couldn't be certain of that either. Through the gentle twinkle of the stars reflecting on her face, he could already see her answer in the expression she wore. He pulled himself up in the bed to sit properly, as best as he could, without gravity holding him there. The heady realization that the end of their lives loomed over them humbled them both to silence. Nye reached out and grabbed Sola's hand, and she looked over to him. "It's been an honor serving with you," he said in a somber tone. She faked a half smile, the best she could muster given the circumstances. Besides, he didn't really even know her. How could it have been an honor? "I suppose we just wait now," she replied after a moment, attempting to hold herself steady against the wall by the bed. "It's not like I'm going anywhere," Nye joked morbidly, lifting his leg. "I'm just glad I'm not alone. Thank you." "I didn't exactly plan this, but you're right." She eyed the cloud of debris from the ultimum from the window. "I hope this was all worth it." Nye followed her gaze. "I don't think we'll get a chance to find out. I was hoping we'd at least get to see it. To see something. We didn't even get to find out what we were going against." Sola hadn't even realized she was curious about that too, until he mentioned it. "We didn't even know if it was hostile. If it can travel through space like that, it can probably wipe us out in the blink of an eye. If we took the chance that it was friendly and it eradicated us, whose head would that be on?" "Everyone's." "But how did this scientist so long ago know that something was coming through there? It's not like they sent probes in, and even then, they wouldn't be able to get them out again to pull data from them," Sola voiced with a slight concern. "I don't even know how they got the timing right. Seriously, how? Hundreds of years ago, did they manage to calculate the exact time the target was going to appear? What did they know that we don't?" It all seemed too perfect to him. Perhaps there was a mathematical formula based on the readings they could take, but science had come a long way since then, and they wouldn't even be able to do that now. "I'm just glad they got it right. I don't think it matters now they got the numbers. Maybe they wrote it down somewhere." Sola answered with a shrug. "Oh, not like they'll teach that to anyone. Everything has been about the target for so long. About building the Spes Ultimum and protecting the world. They used to teach kids about everything. Art, cooking, religion, history." She listed. She wondered what those classes would have been like, instead of just practical lessons based around the station. "What did they teach you in school?" Nye took a second to think about it, raising a finger for each class. "Mathematics, science, engineering, electronics." Sola nodded fervently in agreement. "Me too. Nothing else mattered. I got into biology program and they locked me into a medical track when I was 11. I got put into hydroponics. I wasn't interested in plants, but the science behind it I found pretty interesting." He looked on in thought for a moment. "What class would you like to take?" Sola considered the question, but quickly came up with a response. "I know it's silly now, but languages. People spoke lots of different ways before. I've always thought it'd be nice to speak another language." You wouldn't be able to use it these days." I know. It's just interesting. How about you?" History, I think. We've been around on the planet for a long time, but all they ever tell us about the time before the target was that humanity lived in peace, whatever that means. We can't just sit around living in peace for thousands of years. There are probably a lot of things that we can learn from the past. Probably a few things they'd rather keep hidden too. Maybe something that would have helped us out with this. I'd like to find out about the future too. Everything has been leading up to Instant Zero, and now that it's come and gone, I wish I could find out what happens to the world. Sola took her hair out of the hairband and pushed her hand through it to attach it back to her wrist. She wasn't operating in a professional capacity anymore, and there was nobody to reprimand her, even if she was. Maybe that's selfish of me. Maybe I was never meant to know what happens next. What do you think will happen? I don't know. Maybe they'll teach languages and history now? Sola flashed her teeth in a slight smile. Given all that was happening, the death of hundreds of thousands of people minutes before and their own impending demise, she was actually cracking jokes. Nye smiled back as best as he could, but ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. With the target gone, maybe they will. This cult we've born into, the target, Instant Zero, this sole sacred focus, there's no reason to keep it up anymore. Maybe people will be free to choose their own path and focus on the things that make them happy. Maybe we can work on fixing the world instead of protecting it. Sola thought about that, about returning the world to the way it was before the black hole appeared and changed everything. Forests, lakes, polar ice, predictable temperate weather. It sounded like paradise. They might not be able to get back to the biodiversity, not without cloning at least, but it would be a much nicer place to live. She pictured the moments after the black hole appeared and imagined living through that before asking, the target, whatever it was, do you think it'll be back? The thought hadn't crossed his mind. If it does, or if there's another one, let's just hope it won't take hundreds of years to prepare for. Really, he knew it didn't matter since neither of them would be there to find out. It wasn't their problem anymore. Silence filled the room again. Do you think we did the right thing? She asked quietly, curling her knees up to her chest as she floated against the wall. We did what we did. There's no changing it now. Even if there was a better way, we can't just scrap something this big halfway through. You know, I heard of a few people questioning the project from the start, but they just vanished. Something struck the side of the infirmary, rattling the walls with a low steel groan and sending the room spinning slightly. Sola quickly grabbed the bed and pulled herself on top of Nye, pushing him into the mattress to keep them both in place. I'm not sure how long we have, she murmured despondently. It doesn't matter. I'm just glad you were here with me until the end. It's a lot more than everyone else got. At least, they didn't suffer. Sola's eyes became glossy as she fought back a tear. Thank you. Nye slowly pulled her back into his body and held her head to his heart with one hand cupped around the back of his head, staring at the ceiling. No, thank you. Hey, sci-fi horror fans. It's Keon. Thanks for listening. Did you enjoy this story? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, stay cosmic.